Welcome, Easter people of the ELCA. We're so glad that you're here today. I am Jill Beverlin. I'm the coordinator of coaching for our denomination, and I will be facilitating the flow of our time together. And I want to say once again that I really love seeing your faces. Each of you reflects the love and hope that we find in Jesus. And I seriously, after each of these meetings, I feel like I could float on Wednesdays. We are church together, and this gathering is better because you are in it. It's important that you hear and know that today. We have a very powerful topic to dive into, and right now I want to call upon Bishop Eric Gronberg of the North Texas-Northern Louisiana Synod, who will share a bit more about this and introduce our guest speaker. So with that, Bishop Eric.
Thanks, Jill. Great to see so many of you on the call today. What a gift this has been to be able to get together. I was able to stay on for the full hour 2 weeks ago, and it was just a joy to see so many people connecting. What I love about this is it is people choosing to come together around topics, and it's flexible and adaptive, and that's something that is near and dear to my heart. We are in a time in which I think coaching and adaptive leadership are essential. It's something we're trying to build into our culture here. We've had experiences with coaching, of receiving pushback on what's that coaching thing, but as people begin to understand the gifts that coaching brings, it's mostly misunderstandings. And I think that's what we're going to hear from Robert today about a different way of thinking about coaching, as well as in talking about grief coaching and an expansion of our vocation as leaders in the church into what he's calling societal chaplaincy. I pushed back on that term initially with him. I gave him a little bit of guff about it because I wasn't sure we wanted to use that word chaplain because it means something very specific. But I was grateful that Christopher Otten, the director of federal chaplaincy for the ELCA, I reached out to him and he said, no, I think that word actually plays in this time. And it's a powerful word of how to expand our vocation. So once again, we're adapting and learning and thinking differently about who we are as church. Grief is driving so much of what we are up to right now. Grief is driving so many of our decisions. Just today, the three bishops of Texas and Louisiana of the ELCA released some guidelines and thoughts related to what might we do when it's time to reopen, because people are in grief about their economy, about missing their friends, about all these things, and they're pushing decisions to be made out of their grief. And here in Texas, I don't know if y'all noticed, but West Texas Intermediate crude went negative for the first time in history. That's oil prices, for those of you not in our neighborhood. That's terrifying for us in our economy, and there is grief there. And it's not just Texas. So I think this is a powerful topic. I'm grateful to Robert for bringing his gifts to the table on this. We're grateful to have him at Briarwood Leadership Center, part of our pivoting and moving. And I'm going to let Robert take it from here, but please welcome Robert Smith.
All right, folks. Well, it's so good to see all of you, and such an honor to be part of this conversation with this highly skilled and engaged group. I've been in some conversation with both Jason O'Neill and Jill about ELCA coaching. I know that you have the very strong support of Bishop Gronberg, who I'm privileged to work with here in Northern Texas. I'm coming to you today from Denton, Texas, which is the top part of the triangle of the DFW Metroplex, sort of north and in between Dallas and Fort Worth. I'm originally from Oklahoma, so this is my part of the world here, but I've been living in other places as well. So I will attempt to now share my screen so that you have some visuals besides me. Hopefully that's helpful. Let's see if it works. And Jason, I'm running into an issue, so it may be that that we need to move to your screen share instead of mine. unless I just did it.
I think that's me.
Oh, great, Jason. I'm so glad it's you. Yeah, so if you could go ahead and start the slideshow. Thank you. So back to that first slide, maybe. So grief and hope, societal chaplaincy for and beyond COVID-19. I hope that you've all had a chance to read the blog post that I issued a couple weeks ago on this topic of societal chaplaincy. Since then, I've been in some wonderful conversations, especially with people focused on grief and loss, and how this concept of societal chaplaincy may be a helpful concept for us as we move forward, and then blending that with coaching is a really exciting opportunity. So the next slide, please, Jason. I currently direct Briarwood Leadership Center here in Northern Texas, and I'm associate to Bishop Gronberg for the Northern Texas-Northern Louisiana Synod. I focus mostly on interreligious relations and governmental relations for the Synod, but also do a lot of leadership development work with pastors and other leaders in congregations. We're not limited to pastors alone. In addition, Briarwood is known primarily in our Synod as a campsite for kids. So as we're coming to summer, we're trying to figure out what COVID-19 means for us at our programming at Briarwood. That's part of my adaptive learning is leading that center today. So next slide, Jason. But before that, I, for several years, for 7.5 years, worked with ELCA Global Mission. I was there on the 10th floor, if you've been to the church-wide offices in Chicago. And I was the Global Mission Program Director for the Middle East and North Africa. That was my last title that I held there. And I want to show this to you. There are images on the top from Egypt right after the revolution when, as the Egyptians said at the time, when Hosni Mubarak was invited to leave office as president. And then below that are pictures from Zatari refugee camp in Jordan, the part of the experience of the Arab Spring. I've been through some stuff in my ministry. I've been through congregational loss. I've been through different types of individual loss. This was an experience of societal loss and grief. In Egypt, a moment of jubilation, but also a moment of great unknown, a great fear. In Syria and the broader Arab Spring experience, a time of deep uncertainty, also filled with some possibility, but those possibilities were crushed in most locations. I share this also to say that as we look at the magnitude of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, we're looking at something that none of us can handle on our own. We are not able to address and solve this problem. It is a global issue that we're all swimming through at the same time. It was the same with the Arab Spring. And it wasn't until a couple of years after I began my direct involvement in Syrian issues that I was sitting in an audience in Washington, D.C., listening to a panel of State Department folks who were dealing with the Arab Spring as well, saying they just didn't anticipate this and they didn't know how to deal with it fully. And it was then that I realized that I placed the entire responsibility of solving the Arab Spring on my own individual shoulders. And it was a moment of release, a moment that I gave myself some grace to say, you don't have to fix everything. You don't have to fix the world. You just need to do what you can do in your corner of the world with the people you're called to serve. And that was an important lesson for me that I think is a word of grace for all of us as we deal with the huge problems we face today. So next slide, Jason. Societal chaplaincy is a concept, is a group of words that I pulled together a few weeks ago to try to address what I think our calling is in this moment. Because especially when we're looking at the scope and magnitude of COVID-19, a few weeks ago, we didn't know what the death counts were going to be. We didn't know how huge this is going to be. We know now, as of this morning, we've had 45,153 people die in the United States, 179,000 people globally. And this number keeps going up, both in the US and globally, as this Disease moves more intensively into the global south, as we were hearing before our full presentation began. So Jason, next slide. In the US, this means that we've had over 15 9/11s in a very short period of time. But we're not responding to it in the same way. If most of you were around on September 11th, 2001 in the United States, it was an immediate impact, an event, and there was an immediate response. In some ways, the response I recall is, please everybody remember to go shopping. And we're seeing some of that today as well with the calls to reopen the economy. But we are dealing with the magnitude of mass death. Next slide, Jason. But it's more than just death. So there is the need for mass palliative care in this time of death, but there's also mass trauma and grief that it goes out in ripples beyond the immediate impacts. And that's where societal chaplaincy comes in as we look at the systems of responding to this massive situation and how we can be a part of that greater system of preserving our societal fabric, as well as helping individuals and communities walk through and respond to the grief, loss, and trauma that all of us are experiencing on some level. Next, please. So chaplaincy response you heard Bishop Grunberg say he was skeptical that was the right word, especially because we didn't want to step on the toes of an established professional discipline. When Chaplain Otten responded to Bishop Grunberg's query, he noted three things. I'll just take the liberty of saying that chaplains focus in an emergency situation on three things: ethical advisement to leadership and as moral leaders, official acts and ceremonies and rites for spiritual events to respond to and recognize the gravity of the situation, and pastoral care on that one-to-one and communal basis. Chaplains have all of those functions, and as we consider our calling as coaches, as community leaders, as pastors, as lay leaders within communities, we are all called to those functions today. And part of what I'm asking leaders within the church to consider is, how is your vocation being expanded in the midst of this massive crisis? And next slide, please, Jason. So chaplaincy is a metaphor and a skill set rather than a certification in this case, how I'm intending to use it. It's a set of values, a set of practices for a chaplaincy praxis. And I think the same can be said for coaching as well, because it's not just one thing. And that's important for us to keep in mind. I'm not saying everybody now call yourselves chaplains. I'm saying this is the set of skills and values that we may best be able to put in place. Next, please, Jason. And so then, as I was saying, analogous to coaching. Next. In the magnitude of the situation, we need to recognize that this is a siege. When healthcare professionals were planning for the COVID-19 crisis to come into their communities, they recognized that they would be overwhelmed, that they would not have all the resources they needed. This is like a siege. It is an experience of war. Even if you're not experiencing it directly, that experience of war has an impact on you and our communities around us. Moreover, this is a situation that's not just one single impact, say like 9/11 or some other type of massive natural disaster one-time experience. This is occurring in waves globally and locally. We're expecting that this pandemic, the effects of the pandemic will return to the United States, even potentially stronger in the fall and winter. And so we're not over this yet, even though some people want to convince us that we are. So next, Jason. So we're experiencing tremendous suffering together. Physical loss, economic loss. Bishop mentioned the price of West Texas crude going negative for the first time ever. US news media aren't even discussing that. We don't know what to say about this because it's fundamentally unprecedented. BBC yesterday led with that story. CNN didn't mention it at all. And so I'm curious what the silence means, and I'm concerned. The UN is warning of mass hunger, famine in other parts of the world. And we're going to see societal instability as a result of this. So it is like a war, and our response is needed. Next, Jason. So here are some images to illustrate the intensity of the crisis just in the United States. So on the left, these are the pictures of temporary mass graves being dug in New York City to respond to the crisis there. And on the right is a somewhat close-up shot of the vehicles lined up for the San Antonio Food Bank 1 week ago when 10,000 families were served on one day. They were planning on serving 2,000 families and 10,000 showed up. So there's massive physical harm and loss and death. There's massive economic loss as well. Trauma, grief. You're being equipped for that. Jason. So I'd like to talk a little bit about direct and indirect societal impacts. This is a conversation that we haven't been having as a country. A colleague of mine recently, I'll name him, Bishop Eric Gronberg, who's on the call, was describing some of the losses and grief being experienced in his own household. He mentioned a 6th grader in the household who is both deeply frustrated with online learning because she's not able to respond at the level she knows she's capable of responding at, and deeply saddened that her friends couldn't be present for a birthday celebration. Those losses are not featured on primetime news, but they're real losses. They matter very much to her and to her household. And the household responded well, especially to the birthday challenge. But this is the sort of ripple of grief and loss that is not being addressed. A colleague working in the corporate world said that people are not opting in to the online happy hours that they were doing just a month ago. They're beginning to withdraw from those things and ask questions about the stability of their positions as they see so many other people losing theirs. They're asking questions about parental leave. Can we switch parental leave into this situation so I can care for my children at home now? And the corporate world is not responding well to this because it's an unprecedented crisis. This is a huge level of opting out that's bringing shades of anxiety, loss, and grief, these indirect effects that are not being addressed by major narratives. So I was fortunate enough to stumble onto a small video documentary from the BBC about the town of Nördlingen, Germany. This is Nördlingen. It's a beautiful little town. So like any other medieval town in Germany, it's quaint, it's got a wall around it. This is located in Bavaria, between Nuremberg and Munich. Beautiful place, but there's one striking difference. So when we move to the next slide, we'll see that Nördlingen from the air is almost perfectly round. Well, that's strange. No other town is perfectly round in Germany. So what's that about? The fact is that Nördlingen is situated in the middle of an impact crater from an asteroid that hit Earth roughly 10,000 years ago. And that impact crater, of course, creates this round space. But there's more to the story than just that interesting roundness. When the asteroid collided with the Earth, immense pressures interacted with graphite that was already in the soil and created a new type of rock called suevite. And that rock contains millions and millions of tiny diamonds. So the pressure of the asteroid created all those diamonds. And from that, about 72 tons of diamonds are in the medieval town buildings of Nördlingen because they're built out of that suevite. And more than that, the landscape all around the city, next slide, Jason, is filled with soil that glows when the sun hits it just right. Like like little glints of shards of glass in the soil. So it's not just the one impact crater that's the round town, but all of that surrounding land, all of that surrounding territory is filled with tons and tons of tiny diamonds. So why am I sharing all this geologic trivia with you? I think there's a metaphor here for grief and loss, the type of grief and loss that we're experiencing today. It occurred to me that if we or the people we're seeking to help have not been directly affected by COVID-19, if they're not the family of that doctor, the 32-year-old doctor who died of COVID in Brazil, we may not have experienced that, but the effects are still all around us. They're in us. So even if we have not been jammed directly into the impact crater where people have lost their jobs or have been infected or have had a family member die, we're part of the COVID-19 landscape. That landscape has been irrevocably changed with new geologic formations, new gullies and canyons. Every person has their own perspective on this collective reality we're experiencing. How are we called to respond to this trauma, this anxiety, and this ongoing fear? Now, we could put all of our resources to the people inside the impact crater. But the truth is, those losses, those direct losses, can be named and known pretty clearly. But what do we do with the broader dispersal of trauma, the societal trauma all around? The situation outside the direct impact crater is a little more mysterious. Getting to the truth of what's there requires some excavation and some awareness. It requires a willingness to go on a journey in an unknown space with people. The COVID-19 impact diamonds of loss and grief, though, do demand attention. People are going to notice that they glow because these experiences are within them. So what do we do with that? And so today, I hope that we can talk about addressing the needs of society as a whole. And on the next slide, Jason, if we could also ask, what resources does the discipline of coaching offer in this societal moment? And the next, what resources does the discipline of chaplaincy offer in this moment? And next, what needs to be named and surfaced now? What excavation do we need to help people do? What analysis do we need to engage in to name loss and grief that may not be readily apparent? And then finally, what cannot be resolved? What are we dealing with now that we can't understand at the moment because we're still in it? So I'll close with this quote from Martin Luther. Now when I have given God honor, then whatever life I live for my neighbor, to serve and help. I confess Christ with my mouth, and if it has to be, bear testimony with my blood and risk my life. Yet God does not need the work. These must all tend to serve my neighbor. So this is the real technical version of the Luther quote, God does not need my good works, but my neighbor does. And this is what we're called to be in service to our neighbor, but it's also a time to give grace to ourselves because we're in it with everybody else. So Jill, I'll hand it back to you.
Wow. Thank you, Robert. That is amazing. I've been seeing lots of chatter in the chat area that this is resonating with people. You will be excited to hear that there are already synods that are working on this, and this particular presentation is helping to put language and maybe some additional framework around that. And, you know, we pray over who the next speaker will be and what topic is God raising up. And it just never ceases to amaze me how timely it is and how fitting it is. And so truly, thank you, God, for that providence and this impactful information that Robert has shared. So with this, we are going to now move into our small groups with discussion facilitated by our ELCA coaches. As always, I preface this by saying you should have at least one ELCA coach in your small group. As people hop on and hop off, sometimes things get, and I love this word, a little wonky. So if you need help in your room, raise your hand and one of us will pop in and help, and we'll try to get a coach shifted to you. But that said, here's the framework of the small group discussion. We always want you to take this time to name your truth. How are you doing almost 2 months into this pandemic reaching our country, and a little over a month into this event changing everything that we know to be normal? Likewise, as we continue to process our personal reactions to this impact, our time together also creates space for us to begin naming how we might move forward. What is your role in envisioning and creating a new normal? How are you specifically gifted and resourced to help provide for the common good? With this as a backdrop, I invite you into your small group discussions. Please remember that you have to click the join button in order to get there, and I will bring all of us back to the main screen for our final time of debriefing and blessing in about 30 minutes. So God bless your conversations. Here you go. At this point on the clock, I would like to invite Pastor Christopher Otten. He is one of the assistants to the bishop of our presiding bishop, Elizabeth Eaton, and also serves as the director of federal chaplaincy ministries for the ELCA. And Christopher is going to share a few final wrap-up words and a blessing and a prayer for us on our way out today. So Christopher, with that.
Thank you, Jill. I appreciate it. And I just want to let you all know, since it's hosted by North Texas-Northern Louisiana, I put on my Texas barbecue shirt this morning and grew a beard for Bishop Grunberg. So just to make myself more of a Texan. I just want to say that I really appreciate being invited to join with all of you today and just sharing a little bit. It seems to me fundamental to the idea of the word chaplain is accompanying people in an incarnational way in mission in a dislocated situation. And so I kind of want to leave you with the words of Philippians when it says, "Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness, and being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." And I want to share those words with you because it's this idea of Jesus leaving the majesty of divinity and going to some other location, and it says taking on the form of human likeness. And fundamental to the idea of a chaplain, I get a question frequently. People say, why do we have chaplains in the federal government? You know, why? And it's because our Constitution says every person has the right to exercise the freedom of religion or no religion. And so we have chaplains in the Senate, we have a chaplain in the Senate, we have a chaplain in the House here in Washington, D.C., because your representatives are dislocated from their home district. Your military personnel from Texas, and there's a lot of military personnel in Texas, Alaska, you know, people from all over the United States on this Zoom call, your service members are dislocated. When your veterans or members of your congregation, when they go to a VA hospital or have to go to a clinic because they've got COVID symptoms, they are dislocated from their home. They are in a different location. Same with university chaplains. You know, our students go off and they're at a different campus. So fundamental to the idea of chaplaincy, which is why Dr. Smith's idea of societal chaplaincy, we are dealing with worldwide dislocation. You may be in the same house, you may be in the same place in the same community, but I know when I walk the streets of Bel Air, Maryland with my son at night, it is empty. It is weird. And there's a sense that I'm in the same place, but completely everything has changed. And so when I was trained after Hurricane Katrina for dealing with grief, the Air Force told me that their definition of grief is this: any end or change to a relationship or a familiar pattern of behavior. So think about people who are dying, an end or a change to a relationship, or to a familiar pattern of behavior. Have any of you changed your pattern of behavior in the last 4 weeks? We are collectively, worldwide, going through a moment of grief, and I believe every ELCA pastor is uniquely educated, formed, and qualified to be able to engage their community. The last church I pastored was in McAllen, Texas, and I ran into Mayor Cortez in Costco, and I said to him, I said, Mayor Cortez, I just want to let you know that the people of my Lutheran church pray for you. And he was like, you know, you could tell it was a political moment. He shook my hand and, oh, thanks a lot. And then I said, Mayor Cortez, if my congregation could serve the community of McAllen in one way, if there's one thing that we could focus on that would help you out, what would it be? And you could tell he didn't know how to answer. And he said, let me get back to you. And that's really the question that I would ask each one of you and also your congregations. Not, you know, there's the issues of congregational survival and budgets and all that stuff, but how are we going to minister to the needs of this moment worldwide and in our communities and our congregations? And I think Jesus' example of incarnational ministry and the word chaplain, you may not be a vocational professional chaplain, but every ELCA pastor in our congregations, we're uniquely qualified to take up that name, to take up that ministry and that mission so that we can say, hey, we can be church together for the sake of Christ, for the sake of the world, and serve our communities.
Thank you for that amazing wrap up. Another giant word of thanks to Robert for writing that article, for listening to the Spirit, putting that on your heart. Thank you. This movement has just started, and I think that it is a unique opportunity and moment for our denomination to live into being the hands and feet, ears and heart of Christ in a way that we haven't been able to before. And with that, I say thank you again for being with us. Come next week, we will be hearing from our friends from ELCA World Hunger. Food insecurity is an escalating cause of concern for us, and we get to collectively name that and figure out how is God inviting us to move into that realm and make a positive impact. So this is just the beginning of this conversation. I know we will revisit this topic. Thank you again, everyone. God bless you.